Hey guys, Brian here, Starlite Pulp. This is Starlite Pulpcast number, I think it's number 26. And today we have Mr. Charles Ardai from Hard Case Crime, and this is his new book, Death Comes Too Late. It is a collection of short stories, and it also comes on the eve of Hard Case Crime's 20th anniversary. So we're going to talk a little bit tonight about not only the short stories in the new book, but also a little bit about the history of Hard Case. So, Charles, how you doing today, man?
Doing great. Thank you for having me. This is very exciting. I'm excited to see what Starlight Pulp is up to and be part of it.
Excellent. I appreciate you, man. So Death Comes Too Late. First off, the um cover is very Bondish. Yeah,
Very Bondish. So
very
the
Bondish.
cover was painted. You're absolutely right, and what you're picking up there is a resemblance to the work of Robert McGinnis, who was the
Yes.
painter who painted the original movie posters for the Sean Connery James Bond movies, and also a few of the Roger Moores. This cover was not painted by Robert McGinnis, although Robert McGinnis is still alive. He's about 98 now.
Oh,
And he has painted for us. He's painted more than 20 book covers for us, but that's not one of them. It was
uh-huh.
painted by a man named Paul Mann, who lives in Utah. He's younger than Bob. He's the next generation, but was heavily influenced, clearly heavily influenced by Robert McGinnis, and loves his style. And so Paul has been doing alternate movie posters. That's a whole category of art that I didn't
Oh,
even know
without question.
existed. You know all about it, right? So it's not that his movie posters are the ones you see on the sides of buses and maybe sometimes, but what he does is he'll do a new poster for The Godfather, a new poster for Ghostbusters
Hmm.
20 years after the movie comes out. And they're gorgeous. They're really
Yeah.
beautiful. And a lot of major filmmakers want to see his work. In fact, Quentin Tarantino, when he published his first novel, which was based
Hmm.
on Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, he went
Hmm.
to Paul Mann to do the cover painting, which is pretty cool.
Excellent. That's
And so I
awesome.
wanted to do a cover with Paul. He'd done half a dozen for us or more, but he'd never done one for one of my books, and I was very excited to get Paul to do it.
Of
And
course.
so
Yeah.
that's Paul Mann, and he's brilliant.
Yeah,
And
he
the
is.
idea was it is kind of Bond-like because one of the characters you see on the front cover is in a dark suit, like a tuxedo, and he's spinning with a gun in his hand. So you
Yeah.
immediately think Pierce Brosnan, you think
Oh,
Daniel
yeah.
Craig,
Yeah.
right? You can't help it.
I
Funny
mean,
enough, there's
yeah.
no story in the book that is very Bond-like. The closest is a story called The Case, which is
Mhm.
about a terrorist, a freelance weapons guy who works for terrorists, and he plants a bomb on a plane that is supposed to blow up at JFK Airport in New York. But for
Right.
some reason, it doesn't blow up. And he knows he's in very serious trouble because he took a lot of money to make this plane blow up and it hasn't blown up. And the
Right.
question is, what happened to the bomb? That story is probably the closest to a James Bond type story, and it's a lot of fun. But there's no real Bond story or Bond type story in here. I did go to the Bond estate because the folks who run the Ian Fleming estate, which is all the Bond material,
Mhm.
are one of them is someone I know well and have worked with for years. And I said, wouldn't it be fun now that I have this cover from Paul Mann and it looks so Bond like? Maybe I should write a James Bond short story to go in
Right.
the book to go with the cover. And they liked the idea in the sense that they thought it
Oh,
was
very cool.
funny, but we didn't do it. So the collection, just to give your viewers, your listeners, the sort of background that they need, Hard Case Crime celebrates the kind of storytelling that you used to see in the 1940s, 1950s in paperback crime fiction. These were skinny books.
Yep.
They sold for a quarter. They all had painted covers with gorgeous women and tough guys with guns. And the storytelling was high velocity, tight. No book ran more than 200 pages. That's the kind of thing we like to do. And what we do is almost entirely novels, not short stories, it's novels. But I grew up with short stories. I loved short stories. And on Ray Bradbury's 100th birthday, he wasn't alive anymore, but on what would have been his 100th birthday, we put together a short story collection called Killer Come Back to Me.
I
And it
remember
was
that.
Ray
Yep.
Bradbury's crime stories. Now, people generally don't know he also wrote crime fiction. They know he writes fantasy and he wrote science fiction, but they
Hmm.
didn't know he wrote crime stories. So we put together a collection of his crime stories, and it did really well. A lot of our readers, a lot of our fans said, "Boy, that was good. That was satisfying.
Hmm.
Do more." And
Yeah.
so when we came to our 20th anniversary, I thought, well, why not? It's a little self-indulgent, but I've been writing short stories for 30 plus years. What if I took my favorite 20 stories for the 20th anniversary, 20 stories by the founder of Hard Case Crime, put them together in a collection? One of them won the Edgar Award. One of them was a finalist for the Shamus
Right.
Award. Some of them were chosen for year's best. And some of them weren't. Some of them are just very obscure stories that I happen to personally love. And
Hmm.
I said, why don't I put that collection together and put it out in the world for people who love short stories? It's not every reader, but for people who love short stories, they don't get that many chances. So what you're doing at Starlight is an example of feeding that hunger. And we thought this book might feed that hunger too.
Excellent. Yeah, it's funny too, because like you just mentioned right there, there's a few things I want to touch on, but one of the things is when you put a collection together like this, and like you said, there were some of your favorite shorts, uh, you know, having been, written a ton of shorts and poems over the years that have been, published, and many have won awards, things like that. Some of the ones that are more celebrated are not necessarily my favorites. It just,
I totally agree.
yeah,
I feel the same way. I mean, look, I won't say that a story that I got an award for wasn't good. I'm grateful if anyone thought it was good enough to just win an award. I'm very grateful for that. But then there are some obscure ones that I just treasure and I love, and the germ of the idea underlying it was something I really got excited by, and I think the execution is good, and nobody ever gave it an award. That's fine. They don't have to, but I want to make sure readers can find it, and especially if the story came out in a magazine that came and went on the newsstand, and that was 20 years ago, or it came out in an anthology. Anthologies are wonderful. I have a collection of anthologies, a whole shelf full of them, but it's rare that you find people who go out and seek out old anthologies, even though they're great fun to read.
They are.
And you often can't really find them. I mean, the internet is powerful. You can usually find the contents of any anthology, even old ones, but you're not really going to search out one short story you haven't read by an author, even if it's a favorite author of yours. So there are definitely some stories of mine that I consider lost just because they are on page 172 out of 384 of a book that nobody's ever going to read again because it came and went. And so this is my chance to bring them back and give people a taste. And hopefully as they read through a collection that's all my material rather than 20 different authors, they'll start to see thematic similarities and continued, ideas that come back from story to story. And, hopefully it'll add up to more than just a collection of disparate stuff. It should also have some kind of unity to it. We'll see. We'll see what people think.
Exactly. Okay. So we're going to get back to short stories in just a sec, because I love talking shorts. We're going to get back to that. But I want to touch on one thing you said when you were first answering that I think is just a major miss. And I know it's all financially, it's all financially driven, but I was speaking with Daniel Pine a while back, who is an excellent writer in his own right, has 4 or 5 books out, and has also directed Where's Marlowe. He was a showrunner for Bosch, and he's been in Hollywood for a long time, wrote Manchurian Candidate, has a long resume in Hollywood. And we were talking about movie posters, and we're sitting there going, why do movie posters suck now?
because there's no art to them. It's all design. Now, good graphic design is good, don't get me wrong, but it's all type and a giant photograph of the actors, and that's it. I miss Drew Struzan, who's still alive, and he's out there, and he even did a cover for us once. Drew Struzan created the legendary posters for Back to the Future, Star Wars, Indiana Jones, E.T. That's he was as good at what he did as John Williams was at writing the music.
Exactly.
And I miss posters like Drew Struzan, and that's why I'm so happy to get to work with guys like Bob McGinnis and Paul Mann and the other people we work with. But I do miss it. Book covers too. Book covers used to be sexy and fun and intriguing and mysterious, and now they're usually the author's name, the title, and maybe a little tiny picture of a gun. That's it. And it's fine if people want that. Who am I to say no? But I miss the old kind of covers. That's why Hardcase exists.
Absolutely. And before we started, we were talking about there's a lot of those movie posters you mentioned, especially the early Indiana Jones ones, but the Star Wars Empire as well. And then you go back into even some of the Frazetta Eastwood stuff. They're iconic. And, people look at them and they appreciate them. And now, you could probably, and then even further back, you go to some of and I'm forgetting the artist's name, which is unfortunate, but some of the Hitchcock posters.
Oh, yeah.
Were phenomenal, back.
Oh, absolutely. You're thinking of some of the, like when Saul Bass did the movie, the opening credit titles. I don't know if Saul Bass did any of the posters. Maybe he did. I have no idea if Saul Bass ever did posters, but he did credit sequences. And I probably should know that. But another one is Bob Peake. Right. If you think of the classic movie posters, even for movies that didn't do all that well, like Bradbury's Something Wicked This Way Comes. I think that was a Bob.
I remember
Peake
that one.
Poster.
Yeah. But that's the point. See, I remember.
You remember it.
I remember it.
Yeah. So how long has it been? What is the most recent movie? That's an interesting question. Most recent movie for which the poster feels legendary or the poster really sticks in your mind. And I bet we could think of, nothing's coming to mind off the top of my head, but I bet we could think of one. But it's not as easy as it used to be. And by the way, the same is true of theme music. I think probably the last film score that people whistled on the way out of the theater was Harry Potter, right? You can still do da, 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 da. You can do that. And that's John Williams. But what else is there that people, it used to be in the 70s and 80s, you would, you'd see Ghostbusters, Rocky, Pink Panther, and you could film every one of those.
Yeah. Yeah. And a couple of those posters I was thinking of for Hitchcock would be like Vertigo.
Yep, Vertigo.
And
That's
Anatomy of a Murder. Those, and I'm forgetting the artist's name, but they're just phenomenal. And it's just such a shame that we've lost it. And I was talking when I mentioned it to Daniel, who's in the industry, he said it's all financially driven. He said it's He said they can put a poster together, and I'm paraphrasing here, but they can put a poster together in an hour on Photoshop and not have to worry about it.
Wait till AI is doing it. You're going to have AI posters only. And the other thing is time, right? If you go to a painter, even a fast painter will take weeks or months and have to create likenesses. I mean, that's not true. It's not months, but it could be a month. Whereas if you've got your movie ready to be released and you're ready to push a button and put it on streaming, you don't necessarily have a month to wait for somebody of great painstaking talent to slowly move a brush over canvas. You need your poster faster than that. So I have some sympathy, but I do miss it. I worry sometimes that I'm one of those old guys, the get off my lawn type guys who say, I love things the way they were when I was a kid.
Right.
Well, I do love the way they were when I was a kid. In fact, frankly, it's weird. I love things the way they were before I was a kid.
Right.
I'm not a depression baby, but I love the way things were in the 30s, 40s, 50s. That's a period that I really treasure. But look, things are good today too, different things.
Yeah.
So I don't want to be too curmudgeonly, but I agree with you. I feel the same way.
And one thing I want to say, by the way, one of the things that popped in my head when you said a recent movie poster, and this is not recent, but it's recent compared to what we were talking about. Pearl Harbor.
Okay.
Sure. If you recall, not the main poster, I don't remember that one at all, but they put out some alternate posters and they were all driven from the early 40s art that were we want you in the military kind of thing.
Oh, sure.
Where they were all, the Rosie the Riveter kind of art. And they were really well done. They had one for they had one for Affleck, they had one for and they were all done in that style. And I actually thought those were really cool.
I'm not sure I ever saw those. I'd like to. I do remember when they did The Good German, which I think was Elijah Wood. They did a poster in the style of the old Casablanca poster. It was obviously a pastiche, but they were trying, and so I gave them credit for that. And then I think there have been some horror movie posters that I thought had some cleverness to them. I seem to remember a good Cabin in the Woods poster. I don't know. There are some, but it's not the heyday. It's not the golden age. Of posters when you got The Godfather or Chinatown. Think of that great poster for Chinatown. That's classic. So even some bad movies had great posters.
Absolutely.
Anyway, so we don't.
In fact, when it is a bad movie, most of the time I'm going to remember the poster more than
that's true. So imagine if Madam Web had a great poster. Wouldn't that be nice? Something good for it.
Yeah. Well,
I haven't seen Madam Web. I shouldn't make fun of it because all I know about it is that everyone hated it. But I haven't seen it myself.
It's getting panned for sure. Yeah.
For all I know, it's brilliant, but I'm not going to bet on it. I'm not going to bet $15 on it.
Yeah. Well, so we were talking about covers, and so kind of the being iconic in that way, and that's one of the things that I think Hardcase has managed to do over its first 20 years for sure. Is regardless of what artist you're using, when you look at a Hardcase book, between the spine and between the cover, you go, oh, that's a Hardcase book.
Well, thank you. Yeah. So all the spines of Hardcase books look exactly the same. They all have the ribbon at the top, and they have the red and the black title author's name, and that's deliberate. We wanted to give it a collection feel, a curated collection feel.
Absolutely.
And then the front covers, you're right, we use different artists. This is some of our 20th anniversary titles. Nobody's Angel is a painting by Claudia Caranfo, who lives in Italy, very much inspired, I think, by Taxi Driver, because it's a book written by and about a taxi driver. Then in May, we've got Into the Night by Cornell Woolrich, finished. It was an unfinished novel at the time of his death, finished by Lawrence Block. That painting is by Greg Manchus, who, if you saw The Ballad of Buster Scruggs by the Coen brothers, the interstitial paintings between each segment and the next, those were painted by Greg Manchus. And then in June, we have Rex Stout, a lost novel by the creator of Nero Wolfe called How Like a God. And that cover is painted by a man named Ricky Mujica, who's a brilliant New York artist. He's phenomenal. But it's actually a kind of posthumous collaboration, because the woman, although painted by Ricky, was based on a reference photo shot by an old-time paperback painter named Robert Maguire, now deceased. And he died before we ever had the chance to work with him, although I did talk to him once. And his daughter was kind enough to give us access to his photo files. And when he was alive, he'd take photographs of, for men, it was him. Usually he'd photograph himself for the male characters and some model for the female characters. And we found a woman that fit for this cover. And so this was a photograph taken by Robert Maguire sometime in the 1950s, and Ricky painted based on that photograph. So that was sort of fun to get the chance to do that. So yeah, look, we want people to see a hard case crime book in the stores and say, I know what that is. I know this is from those guys who love the old-fashioned retro pulp style stuff. And if I liked the last one I read, I'll probably like this one too, and I'll pick it up. And we've had people say that, even relatively well-known people, like writers like Pelicanos. I remember he said, I'll pick up anything that has the hard case crime logo on the cover, which feels great. It's like, I don't need to know who the author is. As long as it's a hard case book, I know it's a certain type of book, and that's worth a lot to us. So we try to deliver that experience.
And that's the epitome of the good side of branding. Right. Which is you see something, you go, oh, it's from them, whoever they are. Right. Boom. I need to have it.
Right. I was comfortable wearing their sneakers. I'll probably like their sandals, whatever it is.
Yeah.
By the way, don't ever trust me to make you a pair of sandals. Your feet would hurt. But books, I can do books. Yeah. Right. So for instance, we did for 20 years, we've done traditional printed text-based novels and now some short stories. But about 5 or 6 years ago, we're working with a publishing company called Titan. They're fantastic. They are the ones who actually produce our books and get them into stores and do marketing and so on. And they also do comic books. So we started a line of comic books also. And we thought, well, if you like our novels, maybe you'll like our graphic novels. And so we have things like Heat Seeker, which is the story of a woman who, if you're marked for death, will help you disappear for a fee. And has the hard case crime logo on the top, but it's a comic book. I probably shouldn't flip this too much because it has nudity and it's for adult readers. But so depending on where this airs, you might not want me to show some pages of it. But we thought we can do a brand extension into comic books and graphic novels. We haven't gone into other genres. So I know you, for instance, you are broader. You'll do a variety of genres. So it's not all crime. I don't know if you do Western, but you do horror and science fiction.
Love it.
Oh yeah, it was very few people are doing Westerns these days.
I know, that's one of the, absolutely.
That's why you have to do it. So we haven't done that yet. We did do one spin-off series that didn't really work, but we tried it, which was Indiana Jones style adventure. We did 6 books in a series called The Adventures of Gabriel Hunt and had a lot of fun doing it. They were all original new novels about this character, Gabriel Hunt, and I had a blast and nobody wanted to read them. But that's okay. You try things.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right. So let's get back to shorts. And the reason I mention that is because in the introduction for Death Comes Too Late, you wrote, most fans of crime fiction get started reading short stories.
I think that's true. You read Sherlock Holmes as a kid, right? You read other things as a kid. You might read Hardy Boys. Those aren't short stories, but a lot of people read, maybe it's the Father Brown stories, right? Or maybe it's definitely Holmes and Poe for sure. So everyone reads The Purloined Letter. Everyone reads The Telltale Heart. Now, The Telltale Heart is not really a mystery, but it's a crime story. Guy gets chopped up, right? And so you grow up being exposed to crime fiction, even with literary short stories like, for example, The Lottery by Shirley Jackson, which ends, spoiler alert, after all these years, I don't feel that terrible giving it away. It ends with a death. And it is not it's not a natural death. Let's just say that.
Right.
Or even a story like Raymond, here I'm giving him his full name, Ray Bradbury's The Veldt, right? Which was the story that invented virtual reality. It invented the holodeck, basically, back in the 50s. That also ends with a death or 2 deaths that are not natural. So you read these stories as a kid, you read them in school or just for fun. And then somewhere along the way, you graduate. If you still read at all, you graduate to reading novels and you don't look back. Too many people don't look back. But the pleasures of a short story, it's not just that it's short. It's not just that you can finish it quickly, although that's good too. You're tired, it's nighttime, you want to read 20 pages, you don't want to read 200. Okay, that's a benefit. But a story like The Lottery, it's not just a shorter thing than a novel. It's not deficient. It's not like a small Coke versus a big Coke. When you're thirsty, you want the big Coke. There's a specific kind of pleasure that you can get out of a really great short story that even a great novel can't give you. It's this kind of just punch to the side of the jaw that you go in and out quickly, and it floors you. It just drops you like a good boxer. And look, a novel can do that too, but because of its pace, it doesn't do quite the same thing.
No.
You're with it for too long.
Mhm.
And so the idea of a story that is one idea crystallized, told perfectly, told in a way that makes you tell your friends, oh man, you got to read this one. This
Mhm.
one's going to knock you out. That is what a great story can do. I will not be so immodest to say that any of my stories are going to do that for you. You've got to decide that for yourself. If you pick the book up, I hope at least one of them gives you that feeling. But that's certainly what I was aiming for. When I sit down to write a short story, that's what I want to give the reader, that
Mhm.
experience of, oh my God. And it's harder to do that in a novel. You try sometimes. It's
Yeah,
funny. It's like I think the last chapter of a novel is like a short story because you
a little
want to
bit.
leave people with that floored feeling, but
Mhm.
really you can only do it in the last 10 pages. You can't floor people for 200 pages,
No,
300 pages solid. It's exhausting. It
it
wouldn't
is.
work, you
It
know.
is.
But what
It is.
about you? I mean, you read short stories. What's
Yeah.
your experience?
Oh, all the time. Well, you know what? I do want to say one thing. We have had
Sure.
a lot of people tell us with the reviews that they do exactly what you just mentioned, which is that they read one at night. So they read one story a night and they kind of carry that with them throughout the next day. And they, you
Oh,
know,
that's great.
it's right, exactly. It's something that they can, kind of make their own, and then they're on to the next one a night or two later. And
Great.
that's pretty cool.
Pretty
That's
happy. Yeah. The thing with short stories is if you try to read them back to back, I think it is a hard thing to do because each story introduces you to a new set of characters, at least, and possibly a whole new world, especially if
right.
it's science fiction. You could go from dragons in the Middle Ages to the outer limits of the galaxy on a spaceship.
Yep.
And it's hard to read two, three, four of those back to back because each time
Agreed.
there's this context shifting. Your brain has to go, where am I now?
Right.
Now, if you had a whole collection that's like the old, I guess they're not that old, they're still doing them, the Akashic Noir series, where it's Manhattan Noir, all stories set in Manhattan,
Right.
Dublin
Right.
Noir, all stories set in Dublin.
Right.
The context shifting might not be so huge, but you still have the shift of one author's voice to another, one set of
Sure.
characters to another. So I really think reading a short story and then giving yourself time to digest before moving on to the next one is probably a good way to do it.
Yep. Couldn't agree more. I kind of it's like when I listen to a lot of audiobooks too. And
Okay.
when I finish an audiobook, it's like I need a new one, but I can't start it yet.
Right. You can't immediately
Because
just jump
you
into the
need the
next.
last one to resonate more.
Yeah.
So,
I agree. Even
yeah.
I guess if you have a series about a single character, or
Mhm.
better yet, a continuing story, then maybe you can move into like Harry Potter 3 into Harry Potter 4. Maybe you can
Sure.
go direct. I don't know. But
Sure.
yeah, it's hard if it's completely different stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And then you also had a quote in there that I thought was funny just because of where we are right now with bookstores and everything else going on. It said most magazines have the shelf life of a quart of milk, and anthologies mostly languish half read in dusty corners, unsorted and really unsortable by their contributors' names, which is totally true because even when I'm going to bookstores and giving them the Starlight stuff, it's it's kind of a where do I put this kind of thing, right?
Yeah, if you're
Right?
lucky, some of the specialty indie stores have a section for anthologies, and that's
Mhm.
wonderful. But it's relatively rare, and you kind of wonder, do any of the customers ever go there, or is it only the owner of the store who loves it as much as the two of us?
Right.
Um, it is hard to know where to shelve them, and unless you're one of the bigger name authors who are on the front cover,
Hmm.
the fact that you're in there isn't advertised in any prominent way. So an individual
Right.
author can tell his or her family, friends, fans, I'm in this book, pick it up. But if you're walking through the store, you might see, let's say you're lucky enough to have Margaret Atwood or
Hmm.
S.A. Cosby, or you name whoever it is that's a major figure and people are excited by. So the front cover might have 3 or 4 names, but they'll have 20 people. So what about the 16 who are not on the cover? Those people are really in some ways anonymous. And I always feel a little bad for them, and I feel a little bad for them whether I'm one of them or not. But
Right.
obviously, I
Right.
feel a little worse if I'm one of them. But and in a magazine, it's the same thing. You might have 1 or 2 stories mentioned on the front cover, but you generally don't have the whole table of contents on the front cover.
Sure.
Although in the old days, Ellery Queen would send out magazines, and the front cover would list all the stories, which was kind of a fun thing to do.
Right. Yeah,
But yeah,
we do
it's
that on
hard.
the back cover. On the back cover, we
Okay,
put
okay,
on the front cover it has the whatever image and then all the authors' names. And on the back cover,
okay.
it
That's
has
good.
a brief synopsis of all of the stories with their names.
That
Um,
actually sounds really good. I'm glad you do that.
so
Not
that
too
yeah,
many people do.
and the whole idea is to show not only the breadth and variety of what's in there, but also to make sure that the authors get seen and
Yeah.
The painter's name gets put on the cover and all that kind of stuff. It's just so.
That is a good thing. You're a good person for doing that. I'm glad you do that.
Well, one of the
yeah.
things, Charles, that just absolutely boggles my mind that I just don't understand at all, especially because, like I told you, my dad was an artist, is
Yeah.
you go back and you look at all this brilliant 30s, 40s, and 50s, even early 60s pulp art, and literally half the time now you
It's
can't
not
find,
credited.
yeah, it's an
Yeah.
uncredited artist.
It's true. Now, generally, if you push hard enough and you can find people on the internet who have expertise,
Mhm.
an artist's style is characteristic. So you can generally tell who it is. So a
Yeah,
McGinnis cover, I can tell you a McGinnis cover from a mile away. McGuire, Avati, James Bama, some of these guys have it's people imitate them and you can get fooled
sure.
once in a while. I mean, hell, if you can buy a fake Rembrandt, you can buy a fake Avati, but I can't afford to buy a fake Rembrandt, but you know what I mean. And you can generally either track down who the artist was or
Mhm.
at least make an educated guess, but it's not easy. And now I think it's more common now that the artist gets credited, not 100% of the time, but you generally do see it somewhere on the copyright page or on the back cover in fine
Right.
print. And I'm glad for that. I think artists deserve that. They
Yeah,
also get their art back. Back in the old day, they would hand the painting off to the publisher and it would sit in a corner of the publisher's office and sometimes get destroyed, taken
that's
home by some
crazy.
random person. So now at least the artists get to keep their art and
Yeah,
they just sell the publication rights, not the original piece.
yeah. And you're right, because when we post stuff on Instagram all the time where, it'll be a cover from 1943 or whatever, and I'll always say artist uncredited. If anyone knows, let us know.
Okay.
And we will get feedback sometime, not every time, but probably about a third to half the time, we'll get
Okay.
somebody out there going, "Oh, that's clearly Vargas. You should did."
Right, right,
Okay.
right. Vargas is another perfect example. All these artists that I wish we had started early enough that we could have met or worked with.
Sure.
Vargas, we'd have had to been around a lot longer than we have been in order to work with Vargas. But there were a bunch of artists, including some of the ones I named. Bama was still alive when we started, and I corresponded with him. But he had moved to Wapiti, Wyoming, many decades earlier, and he sent me a very sweet note saying, I retired from commercial illustration in 1961, and George Lucas came to me and asked me to do a cover, and I said no. Clint Eastwood came to me and asked me to do a poster, and I said no, and I'm going to say no to you too. It was a fun note to get. At least I was in good company.
Right.
But,
Right.
yeah, so some of these guys, there was a woman named Elaine DeWillow who did phenomenal covers, but by the time I met her, her eyesight was failing and she didn't feel
Mhm.
she could do the job that she used to be able
Sure.
to do.
Sure.
So I do miss that. We have worked with a couple of old timers. There was a guy named Bill George who did a cover for us.
Uh-huh.
It's quite old when he did. And there's a fellow named Ron Lesser who's not as old, but he's not a young guy, and he's
Mhm.
done several. And he's still working. He's doing some really nice work. So I like working with the old timers, but I also enjoy working with the next generation. The difference is, of course, the next generation mostly work on computers,
Right.
and you can simulate what a brush does on a canvas in a computer, but it's not the same.
It's
And
not the
so we
same.
always try to find somebody who really does the old fashioned stuff with a real brush on a real piece of canvas. I had a guy once, a guy named Michael Kelch, who's a fantastic artist, and he's done the covers for many books that you've seen. And he works traditional, but then he scans the results. And at one point he said to me, I'll paint it the traditional way, but then I'll scan it and I'll clean it up, because what if one of the hairs from my paintbrush is stuck in the paint? And I said, don't do it. Don't clean it up. If I'm lucky enough to get a paintbrush hair in I want it there. Don't remove it. I'll kill you if you remove
Exactly.
that hair. And I meant
Exactly.
it. I want that. I want the tactile feeling that this was the
Mhm.
creation of a man's hands or a woman's hands, but not
It,
a
it's like those little snaps and crackles on the old LPs.
exactly like
They're
that. That's
good.
exactly right.
Yeah.
And sure, a CD remastered can be clean, pristine, pure, and beautiful, and I love it. But oh, those crackles!
Yeah, I know.
Crackles are part of
Yep.
the experience. I when I was
Absolutely.
a kid growing up, I would listen to AM radio. Why AM radio? Because I had an AM radio. It was cheap.
Mhm.
And I would hold this AM radio to my ear and I would listen to radio dramas. And again, I'm not from the 1930s, but there was one station that would play old radio dramas and I'd listen.
Very
And the
cool.
fact that it would kind of fade in and out was part of the
Mhm.
fun. It's
Mhm.
like you had to really struggle to hear what was going on. And that
Absolutely.
was mysterious and fun. So anyway, I do love that old stuff. So one thing we haven't done, though, it's an interesting thing. When we started Hard Case Crime, one of the natural ideas people suggested was, what about putting in fake weathering, fake foxing on the spine? Foxing is when there are those cracks and creases on the spine.
Right.
What if you make it look like the front cover was dog-eared or
Yep.
torn? And we said, we're not going to do that because that's all fake. When you actually saw these books and they came out fresh in the 1950s, they were clean. They weren't bent. They weren't crushed and crumpled. And so it's misleading to create it that way. Let people add their own creases and crumples.
Right.
That's the way to do it. Put it in your pocket. It'll get weathered.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. I have a copy of the first Starlite Pulp review that we've posted before, but it's been around. It was like the ARC copy before they even ever came out, and since then it's been run over. It's been soaked. It's been it's bent. And I take a picture of it, and people are like, "That's fantastic." And I'm like, "Exactly," but you don't want to start with that.
No, you can't. You can't have to come by it honestly. It's like distressed jeans. You need distressed jeans that come from distress. Distressed jeans that come from a factory that way. So look, I'm curious about one thing. When we talk about authenticity, I'm not sure there's a right answer or wrong answer to this. How do you spell review? Do you spell it IEW or UE?
We spell it IEW.
Okay. I guess the Broadway, like if you're a Broadway show, REVUE is the Broadway show version.
Yes, that's the way I would look at it. But
okay,
but yeah,
I accept that. That sounds good. Well, I'm excited that there are folks out there doing what you're doing.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I do want to point out that the guy who's done the covers for 2 and 3 and who's doing 4 that's going to come out this summer as well is a LA artist named Danny Galliotti, and he is fantastic. So he works with us all the time, and he's a great guy. So we're really happy to have him. We use him a lot. And for some of the other books, we use a photographer named Jens Oklich, who does a lot of like Southern California car culture kind of stuff. That's just fantastic. He's so good. So both of those guys, I just want to give a shout out to because they're phenomenal, and we appreciate the heck out of them. One thing I want to point out. Okay, so we started this before we were even recording, but it's 2024, right?
Yeah,
20 years.
You started this thing 20 years. We started in 2004. We published our first books in September 2004.
And so looking back, this is a big question. So, do with it what you will. But But looking back, you're looking at 20 years, right? So how do you think has anything about hard case crime changed in that 20 years? And then second part of the question would be, how has the industry changed at the same time?
Sure. Well, when we started hard case crime back in 2004, and I guess we started a year and a half before that, that was when our first titles actually hit stores. We didn't even buy ebook rights.
Yeah.
We had heard of the thing called an ebook, but we never bought the rights. We let the authors do whatever they wanted with them. And today, if you don't buy ebook rights, you're a fool, even though for me, the authentic version of a hard case crime book is the physical version. We know that a lot of people, maybe even most people now, like to read their books electronically. And so if you don't have the ebook rights and some other publisher does, your print edition is really just an advertising vehicle for their ebook. So now we get ebook rights to all of our books, even though I encourage people to have the physical object in their hands. When we started, we published in the old format. This is what's called a trade paperback. It's large, it's 5 by 8 inches. But the old books were about an inch shorter and an inch narrower. So they stopped here and they stopped here. They were pocket sized, and you would put them in your pocket. They were called mass market paperbacks. I love that size. I love the portability of it. They sort of fit in your hand nicely. But bookstores don't want to carry them anymore, by and large. And the kind of markets where you did used to see those carried, like drugstores, don't carry books so much anymore. If they do, it's just the mega bestsellers, the books that sell 1 million copies. So if you have something more nichey, they don't really want it. Right. So we don't do that format anymore. So those are some technical things that have changed. Unfortunately, our cover prices have gone up. Although I'd like to point out that back when paperbacks cost a quarter, which they did for many years, movie tickets also cost about a quarter. And so we've kind of kept pace. Like your entertainment choice for a night out is either you go see a movie or you buy one of our books. And these days, if you want to go to a movie, that's probably $10 or $12 or whatever it is. And books are about that too. So those are some of the things that have changed with hard case crime. With the industry as a whole, the single biggest thing is not so much that people aren't reading anymore. I think they are, and maybe even more than they used to. The whole generation that grew up with Harry Potter and the Hunger Games and so on, they developed the habit of reading early, and they still like reading for pleasure. It's not that. But getting the word out about a new book has become harder and it's become different. So when we started, even just 20 years ago, if you published a book, you could get it reviewed in any of 100 newspaper book review sections. They're all gone. There's still Washington Post, New York Times. That's it.
Right.
You had magazines. Magazines basically don't exist anymore. If they
Right.
still are hanging on, it's barely. So Time Magazine is basically gone. It exists, but not the way it used to. Entertainment Weekly is literally gone. I think there's a website, but there's no magazine.
Right.
Newsweek is gone. USA Today is still around as a newspaper. There's still some large newspapers, but their book coverage has gone from 10 pages a week to one page, you know.
Yep. Yep.
And so how do you get the word out? Well, online and social media, you now have things like bookstagrammers and book talk, and you try to reach out to the people who are influential there. And if you're fortunate, one of them takes you under their wing and champions your book. But today, at least, they seem to be interested in certain categories of books more than others. And you know, there's subcultures. There are horror fans and there are romance fans and so on. But learning how to reach out to the right people who will really enjoy your book and get excited about it and spread the word about it, it's a new challenge. And that's fine. Life's all about new challenges. Things don't stay the same, but it's definitely a change.
Yeah. Well, there's also just more platforms. I mean,
That's true.
like I mentioned earlier, I listen to a lot of audiobooks. Now, we don't do audiobooks with Starlite because they're, as you I'm sure know, very expensive. To
Yeah. We don't either.
to produce audiobooks, you're generally looking at between $3,000 and $5,000 a book.
Okay.
That's a lot to put into,
Yeah, a small indie operation.
yeah, but I love audiobooks. We just, haven't been able to do them thus far.
Yeah.
But between audiobooks and then you have ebooks and then you have paper books, there's a lot of platforms where, nowadays, and then there's things like Substack and things like that where authors also release things. So, there's the online presence. So with all of those platforms out there, I agree with you. It's not that people aren't reading. It's just that it's, kind of like nowadays when they'll do a political poll and they
Uh-huh.
always seem off because they're
Uh-huh.
doing things that the way that it
Right.
was
Because they're
done
only
30,
calling
40
on
years ago.
landline.
Right.
Yeah,
It's kind of the same concept. It's like
I think
people,
that's right.
they haven't stopped reading. There's all different platforms for it. So you just need to make sure that, you guys are available that way.
Absolutely. And then the other thing is silver lining. People talk about short attention spans. I don't know that attention spans are really shorter, but people do like the short video formats of
Mm.
Facebook Shorts and Instagram and TikTok. It may be that some people who don't have the patience for a full novel, or especially a long novel, will in fact be seduced by the pleasures of a short story or a piece of poetry. Now, of course, a piece of poetry can be Paradise Lost. It can be 300 pages of dense
Yeah,
poetry.
exactly.
But
Yeah.
the average poem is not that. And so
Right.
I'm hoping that people will rediscover the pleasures of some of these short forms. You don't have to be a haiku or a limerick, but it might be an opportunity to get some people reading poetry who never did before. You might not think there's much connection between somebody who likes hard-boiled crime fiction and someone who likes poetry, but actually, Raymond Chandler, famous for his hard-boiled crime fiction, wrote poetry and liked it quite a lot. It's
Yeah.
not an accident that his character's named Marlowe and
Yeah.
that he has a taste for old literature.
Mhm.
And my own first two novels, which I wrote under a fake name, Richard Alias, those were about a character named John Blake, who was named after William Blake, the poet.
Sure.
So I love poetry, and I hope more people will decide to give it a try than did when we were kids.
I actually started out as a poet, so
Uh,
um, I
there you go.
understand completely. um,
I'm preaching to the choir.
right, exactly. So one thing though that I think is interesting, you touched on it earlier, and it's something that we do with Starlight a lot. And obviously, you've got a couple short collections out now between this one and the Bradbury one.
Yeah.
Um, and that is that we decided to, because we're small and because financially we're where we are, it's not like we can just go sign five authors to write novels and
Right.
give them big advances. It doesn't,
You just
work
don't
like
have the
that. So
resources. Right.
so what we've decided to focus on are short stories because we love them,
Yep.
and novellas. And here's the thing about novellas, right?
Interesting.
Is I was just in a bookstore recently. It's called Space Cowboy Books. Great
Okay.
bookstore. It's in Joshua Tree, right out near 29 Palms, way out in the California desert. And the guy that runs it, we were talking. His name's Jean Paul. We're looking at the books, and he's got all these books on the back wall, right? That are all in like little plastic baggies that are hung up,
Uh-huh.
and every single one of them would now be considered a novella.
Oh, that's interesting because it's 120 pages or something like
Yeah,
that.
right. I mean, almost all of Steinbeck's stuff. would be considered a novella. Like
Certainly of Mice and
of
Men.
Mice and Men was 105 pages. I mean,
Yeah.
the vast majority of the work at that time was what we would consider novella length. But now, if you're trying to get a novel published
It's
and
got to be
it's
long.
not 250 pages plus,
Right.
you know, most of the big publishers aren't going to touch you. I mean,
Yeah.
and so we've actually started. We're going to put out our first collection of novellas in the fall, and
Okay.
then we'll try to do that on a year to every 2 years kind of basis, where we do novellas as well. But it's just interesting how it's changed like that, because what was considered a novel in 1950 would very much now, oftentimes at least, be considered
Yeah, it's true. We publish some of the shortest books in the business, but even we rarely go below maybe 60,000 words, which is a short novel, but it's still a novel. It's not a novella. And from time to time, we get submissions from people who say, I'm sending you something that's 27,000 words or 35,000 words.
Right.
And those numbers probably don't mean anything to somebody who doesn't edit for a living, because you don't know what that is in page count. But 30,000 words might be 100-something pages. 60,000 words is 200-something pages. A long novel might be 120,000 words or 180,000 words. That's a big, fat, honking novel.
Right.
And so we have a hard time publishing something that is really short. Now, you're finding a solution, which is you're not publishing a single novella by itself. You're publishing a collection of novellas, and that might be the answer. We've done that with individual authors. So we did a relatively short a novella by Joyce Carol Oates called The Triumph of the Spider Monkey. But it's Joyce Carol Oates. So I think, if you have an author of that stature, people are more willing to take a chance on something unusual in terms of size or format. And what we did was we paired it with a second novella that she had written. Neither was new. They were both about 50 years old, but one was better known than the other. The other had been completely lost. It had been published once in a small literary journal, and it happened to have some of the same characters and some overlap of plot with the first one. And so putting the two together in a single volume, it didn't turn two novellas into a novel, but they fit together. And we were very excited to do it that way. We did something similar. There were two Donald Westlake novellas. We tried that. We published those under the title Double Feature. And the author of Fletch, which has since become any number of movies, most recently with, I think, John Hamm, or maybe it was Jason Sudeikis. I can't remember. But in any event,
it was funny.
It was, so I haven't seen that one, but the same author, Gregory MacDonald, had two stories that were both novellas, somewhere between novella and short novel, and they were both about kidnapping. And so we put those together in a collection of two, and we called that Snatch. And look, we try these things from time to time, but I will say I do find that readers are less receptive to two novellas in a volume than they are to one novel. Maybe they shouldn't be, but they are less receptive for whatever it's worth. And I expect similarly with short stories. If you're Ray Bradbury, people give it a try. If you're not Ray Bradbury, I don't fool myself into thinking that Death Comes Too Late will do the same numbers as the Ray Bradbury collection. And to be fair, I haven't earned that yet. I'm not Ray Bradbury, and I never will be, but I certainly am not now. So that's okay. But I think if we had done a Bradbury novel, it would have done still more.
Probably, yeah. No, I think that short story readers, and especially writers for sure, but readers are very particular about them and very passionate about them. But I think it's a much smaller group.
I think that's right, and that's okay. And people who like opera are a small group, and that's okay. They're passionate about it, right? Or Gilbert and Sullivan, or take your pick. I think there are fandoms that are still not necessarily small. They might be small, but they're specialized. And I think it used to be something when you called yourself a fan back in the day. If you were a fan of Star Trek, that wasn't a mainstream thing. That wasn't like Comic-Con today with hundreds of thousands of people showing up. It's not on the front page of every website. Today, Marvel Comics are universal. And but back in the 60s and 70s, if you were a geek who read Marvel Comics, you had a very hard time, me too, you had a very hard time finding your tribe. There was no internet, right? So you had to find the one other kid in school who liked the same stuff.
It was either a kid that you went to school with or a kid you met at the comic store.
That's right. Or an adult you met at the comic store. And it's true. And the same was true of video games or Dungeons and Dragons. These fanish things were not meant to be something that millions of people did. They were meant to be something that a small tribe of passionate
Mhm.
people did. So
Mhm.
I'm fine if a small tribe of passionate people loves hard case crime.
Right.
Obviously, it's nice to sell more books. I'm always happy when one
Of
of our
course.
books
Yeah.
breaks out, but
Yeah.
I also am delighted to serve the needs of a few thousand people who love what we do.
Right. One of the motivations I took with the novellas was from Jim Harrison. I don't
Okay.
know how Jim Harrison managed to do it because I've talked with agents and things like that, and it's like novella, keep it away with the 10-foot pole. We don't want
It's
anything to do with
true.
it. But he managed to put out 2 or 3 collections of novellas. And one of my favorites is now, of course, this is a little bit of a cheat, and I recognize that, but it's Legends of the Fall, which
Sure.
then became a movie, and then he also had Revenge in that same collection, which also became a movie with Anthony Quinn and Kevin Costner. So, you know,
Well, you got lucky sometimes, and the quality was there. But I mean, look at Stephen King, of course.
oh yeah.
Right, different seasons. Three of the
Mhm.
four stories became not only movies but famous movies. Right,
Yep.
Night
Yep.
Shift. His collections, and I guess he has a new one coming out this year sometime with a beautiful cover. Speaking of book covers, it looks like you're looking at an island, like a Florida island, but if you open the cover all the way, you realize it's an alligator.
Ah,
What looked like an island was actually an alligator, and I forget the title. I should know it. I apologize to Stephen King, who's a very nice man and has been kind to us. Um, I don't remember if it's called Some Like It Dark. It's something like that, and I
mhm,
can't wait to read it. I think
mhm.
I've pre-ordered it, but he has a phenomenal ability to hook people still
Yeah.
with short stories. So even if people
Oh,
don't read
yeah.
anyone else's short stories, they
Right.
probably read Stephen King's short stories.
And that's the thing. I mean, I told you this before we went on, but that's how I started reading short stories. I kind of went, in the short story realm, I kind of went from Encyclopedia Brown,
Mm-hmm.
when I was
Those were
when I
good.
was a kid, to Stephen King shorts. And and I'm talking back in the 80s here. So it was, different seasons, and it was Night Shift, and it was, those back then that I mean, I fell in love with the concept that, you could go this 15 to 25 pages, whatever it might be, 30 pages, and get a whole living story out of it. You know what I mean? And I just thought
Yeah,
that was
yeah.
so amazing. And so, I've always tried to carry that forward. But yeah, he's one of the few that has managed to not only there are some writers that will start in the short story field. They'll
Yep. And then they
write a
leave
couple
it
novels,
behind.
those will blow up, and they'll leave it behind.
Yeah.
He never has. He's still putting out,
Yeah.
say, once to twice a decade. He
Uh-huh.
he'll put out a collection of shorts, which I
Yeah.
just love. I appreciate the hell out of that. So
Yeah, he's kept the flame alive, which is wonderful. There were others in the horror space, uh, like Clive Barker, who had
mhm. Yep.
collections of short stories, and even outside the horror space, I think horror and science fiction and fantasy have a long tradition of short stories, and you can still find short story magazines in those genres. In crime, also, there's Ellery Queen's Mystery Magazine,
Yep.
which has been published consistently, continuously since 1941, and Alfred Hitchcock's Mystery Magazine is still around too. But I think the short story is in some ways more I don't know. I'm about to go out on a limb and say something that's probably just not true. I was going to say better established in science fiction and fantasy. I'm not sure that's quite right.
Mhm.
But there's certainly a great tradition in science fiction, fantasy, and
Yeah.
horror. And
Yeah.
so there are magazines like Fantasy and Science Fiction, Asimov Science Fiction, where you can still get every month or every other month, you can get your fix of interesting, appealing, mind-bending short stories. Uh, yeah, there are some genres that are basically gone. There are no Western short stories. Maybe there are people writing them,
They
but
are.
there are no magazines devoted. There was at one point a Louis L'Amour Western magazine, but
Yeah.
that's gone.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
for
and
mystery,
and
you can
and by
find
the
it.
way, Charles, that's one of the reasons why we take them, because for me, I don't understand how we went from the 20s, especially because of Hollywood,
Uh,
from the 20s to about the 70s, we went from Westerns being maybe the most archetypal way of writing stories
mhm.
or telling stories, even in film, to in the 80s and 90s, they just weren't really welcome anymore,
Not
which
at all. That's
which
right.
I
You would get
didn't get. And
occasional
and
movies, like you'd get Unforgiven or you get
yeah,
Silverado. Once in a while, you get one, but just one, and it didn't ignite anything.
yeah.
It was liked, respected, might win the Academy Award, but it didn't cause a flurry of others. On the other hand, you do Silence of the Lambs, and for the next 20 years, everyone's making serial killer movies, right?
Or
Uh,
or Pulp Fiction, which was great film, and I
Right.
love Tarantino. But how many bad Tarantino ripoffs did we get for the next
That's
50
true.
years? I mean, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, look, you don't have to have horses. Cars are easier to come by. You don't have to dress a town in period drag. So I can understand why Hollywood may have moved away from Westerns, although I will admit, I'm trying to think how much information to provide about this. Probably close to zero, because this most likely won't happen. But I'm working on a Western project now that has nothing to do with hard case crime. It's a film project, and a script exists. I'm working with a producer I've known for many years,
Mhm.
uh, and it's in the hands of some directors that are household names. It may not go anywhere because no one
Sure.
in Hollywood wants to make a
Yeah,
Western.
yeah. Oh, yeah,
But
yeah.
I'm tempted. It's not exactly a Western. It's not 1880. It's
Oh,
1938. So
that's
it's it's
great.
it's it's somewhere between a Western
Mhm.
and my kind of pulp. So we'll see. I will happily come back and tell the story of it if it happens. If it doesn't, which is the more likely case, because in Hollywood, most things don't happen. But
Most things don't.
I'm
No, it's
working
true.
on
I mean, that's just a truism. Most things don't.
it.
But but
Most
but I
things don't
certainly
happen.
I certainly wish you luck there.
Well, thank you. It would be fun if it did work out. It's a kind of storytelling that I miss. I'm
Mhm.
not a diehard Western person, but I've enjoyed some Westerns quite a lot. And there's something about the bleak expanse, the punishing
Of course.
territory, the
Yeah,
survival aspect,
yeah.
the sort of brutal mano a mano contests between people who
Mhm.
each think they're principled, but actually are on other opposite sides of a conflict. There's
Right.
good stuff there. You
Yeah.
know, you still get movie like 310 to Yuma was probably the
That
last
was excellent.
Western.
That was very good. Yeah.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
quite good.
But Elmore Leonard wrote great westerns for a
Yes.
long time before for the most part he started writing crime fiction. And to be honest with you, as great as he is, and he is for sure, I actually prefer his westerns to his
Uh-huh.
crime stuff. Yeah. So, you know, but uh it is interesting. I write westerns nowadays.
Uh-huh.
The last two that have been in the reviews have been westerns. One was kind of like a post-apocalyptic western, but
Okay.
but I always tell people it's funny because I write noir as well, and I write crime fiction, and as do you. And I find that with that, I tend to, for the most part, try to be a little bit more buttoned up in terms of the language and moving from scene to scene, be a little bit tighter with everything. Whereas what you mentioned with the westerns, when I write westerns, I tend to just kind of let the language eat
You
a
can
little
be
bit.
loose. Well,
Because
part of the
right, because you have
storytelling
these
flavor of a
big
Western.
expanses,
Yeah.
right? So there's
Yeah.
nothing out there. So you can kind of have fun with it.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting kind of paradox, but I enjoy it.
Well, I need to start reading some more westerns. It's been a while. Leonard, of course, wrote short story westerns as well as novels. 310 to
Yeah,
Yuma was a short story. I'm almost
yeah,
certain, if
yeah,
I'm
it was.
remembering.
It was.
And Leonard is another one that I would have loved to work with. He was alive and still writing when we started Hard Case Crime, and we corresponded with him a little bit. But he had a well-established relationship with a publisher. I think it was Harper.
Sure.
And anything he only wrote one book a year, and they published it, and that was that.
Yeah.
I wish we had an opportunity to work with him. I think there's a new biography of Elmer Leonard coming out, and the family participated in it or contributed to it in some way. And I'm excited to read that. I find the history of the genre interesting. I find the characters in the genre interesting. So entirely apart from enjoying the novels, it's fun to
Yeah.
learn about who wrote them. So that's a fun. We don't publish anything like that, but
Mm.
I find these things fun when I turn them up.
Cool. Okay, so we're gonna finish up here pretty soon. But one
Okay.
thing that I want to touch on, just because I'm curious, just because I
Uh-huh.
loved this movie, right? So The Nice Guys came out a few years ago, and I mean, I guess, gosh, it was probably close to 10 at this point or something. And
Yeah.
I just enjoyed the heck out of that movie. I
It's
thought
a
it was
fun
I
movie.
thought it was hilarious, and Gosling was great, and Russell Crowe was great.
The
Gosling,
girl was great. Angry Rice as the daughter, she was
she
great.
was
Yeah.
great. Yeah, she steals most of the scenes she's in. And so, but you wrote the novelization for that. Is that right? So
Yeah, I
so
did.
how did that come about? Did they approach you, or how did that work?
It's a funny thing. So Shane Black was the writer director behind The Nice
Right.
Guys, and before that, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, which is another great comedy crime story. And he and I were in touch because he was a fan of the work of one of our authors, one of our old time authors, long deceased, named Brett Halliday.
Uh-huh.
Shane had read a bunch of the Brett Halliday, Michael Shane detective novels, and I forget what it was that got us in touch. I think maybe he wanted to find the estate. I think in Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, he wanted to use some plot elements from one or two Brett Halliday novels in his script. He didn't want to just steal them. He wanted to give credit and he wanted to pay some money. And I think I might have helped him find the estate. But anyway, that's how we got to know each other a little bit. And when we published the Brett Halliday novel, Murder is My Business, he wrote a little introduction to it. So that was the history. And then when he made The Nice Guys, he had the idea. I think he'd seen the Castle novels, the TV show Castle with Nathan Fillion, where he played a mystery writer, or at least I haven't actually seen Castle, so I don't actually know, but I think he played a mystery writer. And at some point, some enterprising publisher put out a line of Castle novels supposedly written by the character played by Nathan Fillion. And Shane saw those and he thought, wouldn't that be cool if we had a tie-in novel or a series of tie-in novels in the same way that in the 70s you had tie-in novels, not just for superhero movies and science fiction movies, but all kinds of movies. You had novelizations for dramas and you had novelizations for crime pictures. So, what if we did a series of tie-in novels for The Nice Guys?
Yeah,
that was his idea. And he reached out to, through Warner Brothers, I think was the studio. They reached out to Titan Books because Titan does a lot of novelizations, and Titan is the company we work with. And the folks at Titan got in touch with me and they said, there's this new movie. It's by this guy, Shane Black. I said, I know Shane. Absolutely. I love his work. And they're talking about wanting to do a novelization. How would you feel about doing it inside Hard Case Crime? I said, that's great. And Shane said, who do you have in your stable? Which of your writers would write this thing? And I said, well, if you don't mind, I could write this thing. Right. I'm glad to write this thing. And so I wrote up a chapter or two just, in 24 hours because it was so obvious what this was going to be like. I knew exactly what voice to use for it because I knew his movies. I knew his voice and I knew I could write that voice. So I wrote up a chapter or two, sent it, they loved it. And that was how the gig began. And Shane sent me his shooting script and a rough cut of the movie before the effects were added. And I basically I think I had 60 days to do it, but I did it in 27.
Okay.
And what I did was I just woke up every morning at 2 a.m. for 27 days, sat and typed. It was dark outside. It was like a noir story right there. I was using a word processor instead of an Underwood typewriter, but it felt like I was an old time noir writer. And I just pounded the keys until a book was written. It's easier when you have script to work from because you don't have to invent the characters. You don't have to invent the plot. And most of the dialogue is preserved intact. Shane said he was very happy if I expanded on it. He said, go darker if you want, make up things, go for it. I said, great. Okay. And so I imagined the past for the Russell Crowe character and some other fun things. So that was how I did that. I wanted to do more. Of course, Shane wanted to do more movies too.
Yeah.
We were together when the movie premiered and he was very pessimistic because I think it was premiering against Angry Birds, the cartoon. And if I'm remembering correctly, Captain America Civil War. And he said, they're just going to eat our lunch. And I said, no, come on. This is a completely different genre. It's going to play to a different audience. But sadly, he was right. And I think it's become a cult favorite. Lots of people love that movie. But it did not do boffo box office. And so there never was a second Nice Guys movie. I have emailed with him about the idea of doing a second Nice Guys novel. Who knows? Maybe one day. But I think we'd have to convince the studio. I don't think he has the right to okay that.
Probably.
I think we'd have to get Warner Brothers to say yes to it. But I did. I wrote a piece of fan fiction. I probably shouldn't announce this or admit it publicly. I do love fan fiction. Some of it's terrible, but some of it's good. Sure. And there was a Secret Santa gift exchange in the fan fiction world where people were offered. You offered to write a short story in a fandom that nobody writes about. It's like everyone writes Star Wars, everyone writes Harry Potter. Sure. But what's a fandom you love that you'd love to read a story about that nobody ever writes? So one year somebody said, I'd love a story about arsenic and old lace. That's an old comedy, in black and white comedy. Yeah. And I said, okay, I'll do that. I'll write that for you. And the most recent one that when I did this, somebody said, I'd like The Nice Guys. And I also like The Sting. And I said, okay, that'll work because The Nice Guys are in the 70s. Yeah. Sting was in the 30s.
Right.
So by the time the nice guys are working, the characters from The Sting would be quite old. And so I had a retirement home with the Paul Newman character in a retirement home.
Right.
And they hire the nice guys to deliver a package. And so it's a mashup of The Sting and the nice guys.
Sure.
And honestly, I love it. I think that now you've got two studios to get rights from.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
I love the idea of Robert Redford and Paul Newman old meeting Russell Crowe and Ryan Gosling. I just that makes me happy.
Yeah, so, very much. That's very cool.
If you've never written any fan fiction, pick something dear to your heart and write a story set in that world. It's a surprising rush. It really feels great.
I'll bet. Very cool.
So that's the story behind The Nice Guys. I love doing it. I think Shane is an incredibly talented guy. I'll mention one more thing about Shane. So he's working now on a movie I think he's called it Play Dirty. Mm-hmm. And it's a story about the character Parker from the novels by Richard Stark, which was a pseudonym, a pen name for Donald Westlake.
Yeah.
And I think just as Kiss Kiss Bang Bang matched up 2 or 3 plot elements from Brett Halliday, I think Play Dirty is mashing up several different Stark novels. It's not an adaptation of one novel.
Yeah.
And it's written by Shane and his partner with whom he wrote The Nice Guys. So I suspect it's going to be very funny, very smart. I don't know when it's coming out, but I think it's next year. Next year is going to be a banner year for Donald Westlake movies. Because in addition to Play Dirty by Shane Black, he's also going to be, there's another movie based on a Westlake novel that we published called Memory, which is coming out, called The Actor. And in fact, The Actor was originally optioned by Ryan Gosling. He was going to play the main character in this movie, The Actor. But he got tied up with The Fall Guy, which is his next movie. So he had to leave The Actor, and it's going to be played by Andre Holland instead. But anyway, The Memory is a phenomenal book. Scary, bleak, dark, very sad, wonderful book about, it's a little bit like Memento, a guy who is violently assaulted, and after that, he can't keep memories in his head. And he has to write notes to himself to remember who he is. And that movie's coming out around the end of this year. And Play Dirty's coming out around the end of this year. And we're putting out a Richard Stark novel in October, and we're bringing out a new edition of The Actor. So around the end of this year, you're going to see a Westlake Renaissance at the movie theater and also in Hard Case Crime. So that's if you watch our website, which for anyone who doesn't know, it's the obvious one, www.hardcasecrime.com. If you watch it toward the end of this year, you'll see some pretty cool Westlake stuff come out.
Excellent. Sounds good.
And that's what we're up to. That's our 20th anniversary year.
That's it. Well, I congratulate the heck out of you for getting to 20. We're at a year and a half.
Hard to believe. How the hell did that happen?
Right. I mean, that's amazing, and you guys have maintained, this level of excellence that, like we've talked about, where, there's brand recognition, right? Where people will say, oh, that's Hard Case. It's good,
Well, thank you for saying that. It's just find something you love, genuinely love, because you're going to be doing it for 20 years, and then just do it the best you possibly can. And you'll find there may not be a million people who love it as much as you, but there are certainly some, and those people will come back. So I wish that for you. I know it's another 18 and a half years before your 20th anniversary, but if I'm still around, and there's no guarantee I will be, but if I'm still around, I will gladly toast your 20th when the time comes, and you should be proud of what you're doing.
I appreciate you, man. Okay, so this has been Charles Ardai. His new book is Death Comes Too Late, a collection of short stories to kind of celebrate the 20th year of Hard Case Crime. This is our new review, came out in December, so go to starlightpulp.com for that. Go to hardcasecrime.com for everything Hard Case Crime in 2024, including the Donald Westlake stuff that you just mentioned. And appreciate you guys coming by. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure. I am excited to do it.
All right.
In this top secret